Let me tell you a story from a time when the internet was, well, kind of like the Wild West. Imagine this. You turn on your computer, and your desktop background is different. It's been changed. But it's not some scary ransomware message. It's a polite little note from the BBC. What?
Yeah, you heard me right. This actually happened to thousands of people. And it is the perfect doorway into an era where the lines between journalism, research, and straight-up cybercrime were, let's just say, incredibly fuzzy.
We're going to rewind the clock to the late 2000s. This was a really critical time for cybersecurity. The rulebook was basically being written in real time, and some of the people writing it were, not who you'd expect.
So get this. To show everyone how dangerous cybercrime was, the BBC's own tech program, Click, decided the best way was to become cybercriminals. They went out and actually bought a botnet with 22,000 infected PCs. They used it to send spam to an email account they set up and even launched a full-on DDoS attack. And the best part? The way they told the victims they'd been used in this experiment was by changing their desktop wallpaper. It's a completely bizarre story that shows you just how chaotic things really were.
Okay, so what kind of weapons were people slinging around in this digital Wild West? To really get a feel for the time, you have to understand the tools of the trade. So let's break down the basic arsenal of these early cyber battles.
The heart and soul of most of these huge attacks was something called a botnet. You can basically think of it as a giant zombie army of computers. Your computer, your neighbor's computer, thousands of them, all infected with malware, just sitting there, silently waiting for a command from one person, the botnet master.
And what's one of the main things you do with a zombie army? You tell it to launch a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack. The flash mob analogy is perfect here. Imagine thousands of people all trying to cram through one doorway at the same time. The botnet master tells all 22,000 zombie computers, go to this website right now, and boom, the website server, that digital doorway, just gets totally overwhelmed and crashes. No real customers can get.
And we're not talking about small disruptions here. The scale of these things was just massive. By 2009, reports showed that DDoS attacks were pushing past 40 gigabits per second. Now, to put that in perspective, that's not just enough to take down one website, that's enough firepower to cripple the entire network of an internet service provider.
But hey, it wasn't all just brute force. The entire digital world was like a minefield of vulnerabilities. Little flaws in the software we used every single day, Adobe Reader, Flash, Java, were being exploited left and right. And the irony, researchers found hundreds of flaws in antivirus software itself. You couldn't even trust a brand new computer. Asus famously shipped a bunch of PCs that were already infected with malware, fresh from the factory. Why?
Now, it's all this technical stuff going on. You know what was often the easiest way for an attacker to get in? They didn't have to hack the code, they just had to hack the person. This is where we pivot from the software to the human brain. And there is no better case study for this than one of the biggest hacks of the time. We're talking 2008, smack in the middle of the US presidential election. The target? Vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin's personal Yahoo email. And the weapon used wasn't some complex piece of malware. I mean, listen to this. This is from the hacker themselves. They said it took them about 45 minutes using just Wikipedia and Google to find what they needed. The whole hack was based on just clicking "forgot my password."
And this case just blew the lid off a huge, fundamental problem. Palin's security question was something like, where did you meet your spouse? For a public figure, that's public information. A good security question has to be something only you would ever know. This whole thing really put that vulnerability on the map.
And if you think that's bad, oh, it gets so much worse. After a huge data breach at a website called rockyou.com, someone analyzed 32 million passwords. And the most popular one, by a landslide? It wasn't password, it wasn't a birthday, it was 123456. Yep, the human element, folks. It was, and still is, a huge, huge problem.
So, we've seen these tools, the botnets, the social engineering, used for general chaos and crime. But what happens when you start pointing them at political targets? Well, that's when you get the rise of what we now call hacktivism.
Take this incident from January 2010. People in China tried to visit Baidu, which is basically their version of Google. But instead of the search page, they were redirected to a page with a political message from a group that called itself the Iranian Cyber Army. And the crazy thing is, they didn't even hack Baidu's servers. They tricked the domain registrar into redirecting all the traffic.
It was a social engineering hack that took China's biggest website offline.
Well, the response was swift, and it was fierce. A famous Chinese hacktivist group called the Honker Union immediately launched counterattacks, hitting Iranian government and business websites. It became this back-and-forth digital turf war fought by nationalist groups across the globe.
So when you look at these crowdsource attacks, these sort of volunteer or opt-in botnets, a really clear pattern starts to emerge. The campaigns that worked, like the ones around the Russia-Georgia conflict or the Iran protests, were incredibly well-coordinated using social media like Twitter. The ones that failed, well, they were stuck using old-school methods like IRC, or they just weren't using social media at all. It turns out success really depended on modern communication.
So we've looked at the chaos, the tools, and the politics. But what was driving all of this? Well, you gotta follow the money. Because behind all the headlines, a seriously sophisticated underground economy was booming.
The whole idea of a cybercrime market stops being abstract when you can put a price on it. Remember that BBC experiment? They were quoted a price, about $350. For that, you could rent a botnet of 1,000 infected machines in the US or the UK. Cybercrime had become a pay-to-play service.
And it was a whole ecosystem. You had botnets for hire, making attacks available to pretty much anyone. You had internet service providers who would basically look the other way, creating safe havens for criminals. You had a handful of domain registrars that were responsible for the vast majority of shady websites. And criminals were even starting to use legitimate cloud services like Amazon S3 to hide their operations.
So, when you put all these pieces together, what's the big takeaway? The social engineering, the crime-as-a-service business model, the political hacks, the exploiting of everyday software, this period wasn't just a bunch of random events. It literally built the blueprint for the digital threats we're all still dealing with today.
Look, the tools today are obviously way more advanced. The malware is smarter, the botnets are bigger, and the stakes are so much higher. But when you look back at this digital Wild West, you really have to ask yourself, has the fundamental fight between the attackers, the defenders, and us, the often vulnerable humans in the middle, has it really changed all that much?